Hello friends, my name is Eric and I'm the developer of Virtuous Heaven, which is a game about infinite dogs, radical friends and the end of history. Hi everyone, this is a devlog for the last month and a little bit. Sorry for maybe not doing this immediately once March 1st came around, but I was busy and also was sick towards the end of February, so couldn't really find the time and all of these other things. So let's talk a little bit about the last month and all of that. So what was the plan? It turns out last month was the Steam Next Fest. Feels more like 10 years ago on my end. So it was mostly centered around that kind of stuff. Take care of the demo during the Next Fest. Gather as much feedback as I can. Evaluate how things have went and all that kind of stuff. And as always, don't fall into despair in the face of the sheer impossibility of everything, which was a challenge. So I did a short update video, I think a week after I launched the demo, or towards the end of the Steam Next Fest. I don't even know that much anymore because again, it feels like a long time ago, even though it wasn't. So here's what happened. Here's what I did mostly over the last month. It was mostly fixing things that were broken. If you want to know what was broken with the demo, you can watch the previous video or the previous update thing I put up. One of the things that I did was I updated and changed the way the wall jump in the game works because a lot of people were complaining about it. Something that nobody noticed because I never updated the demo in that regard again is I changed it back mostly after about a week of playing around with it because I found it very annoying. It's not completely back to where it was when the demo first came out. It's kind of in an in-between state. You once again have to press the button to initiate the wall jump. However, you don't immediately lose it when you let go of the button. So there's a change has was there. I also changed the way the ledge grab works to make it work with the moving platforms that are built in the game to make sure that you don't get stuck in them. But that's an aside. The main reason, again, why I changed the wall jump is mostly what I explained in the previous video as well, is because as I was playing around with it, I noticed that I started initiating wall jumps in places where I didn't want them to happen. For me as a player, and I found that very again cumbersome and unintentional. And again, a lot of what's important with me in Virtuous Heaven is that what you do should be intentional. You should make a decision why when you want to do something, and don't have to basically play around context sensitive things, which is another problem with a secondary thing, but I don't need to talk about that. But that's the kind the whole thing about the way I wanted to set up the movement system, that everything is intentional, everything requires deliberate inputs and deliberate actions on your part, and having a wall jump that is more or less automatic, or is fairly easy to initiate automatic or through incidental inputs, for me felt not very satisfying to do, and again led to problems, or can lead or could lead to potential problems in terms of how the levels are built and challenges are set and all that kind of stuff. So right now it's back to that, since there's no public demo available, especially with the way I changed it back now. It's not a big deal because the only person who right now has to deal with it is me, and that's okay. I will have to make tweaks to the way I explain this stuff and set this up and all that other kind of stuff like in the future to make sure that like less people are frustrated, because I don't like, it's not my goal, like as much as like it might seem strange to people who have played the demo, it's not my goal to like deliberately annoy people. At least not in that regard. So that's just something I have to figure out in that sense. I took a lot of breaks last month because I was incredibly exhausted. I basically was slightly sick to like actually sick over the whole length of February. I fell into despair a few times. Still kind of in a phase like that, because it was just like very, very, very tiring. It's not like that I right now think, oh god, the game's terrible or whatever. It's more like just like being incredibly overwhelmed with like where everything is supposed to go, and like in all of that kind of stuff. And I was also like incredibly overwhelmed with like things that didn't had anything to do with the game itself, but with stuff that piled on like around it that I needed to take care of. And I made the mistake basically in a phase where like already felt overwhelmed to say yes to a bunch of obligations that I probably shouldn't have said yes to, so that further made things even more exhausting. I cancelled most of those, which again makes me feel bad for the people who like in that regard I let down, but what can you do in that regard? So yeah, that was that part. The one big thing that happened this month is that I finally added working moving platforms to this game, or like to my whole platforming framework. I have no idea if they'll actually make it into Virtuous Heaven in any shape or form. However, it is nice to have them. So like moving platforms for me were always a thing that I kind of dreaded, because for a very long time I was not able to figure out a way to make them work without either making them very restrictive or like making them and having the player get stuck in them at some point or another. And that was like very frustrating. What helped me here was that Maddie Thorson, the person who, among other things, made Celeste, re-released or remade her personal website, and like reposted like an old blog post where she wrote about the movement physics in Towerfall and Celeste. And the thing here is that the platforming framework that I'm using, the thing that like does the collision stuff and the math that like makes all the physics work basically, was made by Maddie Thorson for GameMaker in like a long time ago. Like it was made for like an ancient version of GameMaker. I think it wasn't even GameMaker Studio back then, so like something like GameMaker 8 or whatever. And I've been using that thing for a long time, and it's still like the reason why I'm still using this is, one, I got used to like how it works, and also I like it kept working in newer versions of GameMaker, and I figured why I thought there was never a need for me to replace it, right? However, like that system never had like a setup for moving platforms, and the way it's set up, and you can look up the blog post, and the interesting part here is that the way the apparently the collision physics and all that kind of stuff in Towerfall and Celeste are set up are very, very, very similar to the way this old platforming framework works. And to make things very short, the way the collision is set up in this platforming framework is that the object that is moving around, and that in this instance the player, never actually collides with a solid object, but is basically stopped right before it was supposed to collide with it. However, if you have a moving platform, and there's like a very specific order in which like basically the things updates and when the player moves and all that kind of stuff, and I never managed to figure out for myself how to add moving platforms to that didn't break like this. The player never collides with the actual platform. I was able to make moving platforms, but for example, in my previous attempts when I tried to make like vertical moving platforms, I always ended up with the player getting stuck in them when they switched from moving like downwards to like moving upwards. It always happened in this like transition point where like the basically the movement direction flipped, and I never really managed to figure it out until I like read her blog post, realized how she set up the moving platforms in Towerfall and Celeste, or like any moving solid things that interact with the player. And I realized, wait a second, I can just like basically adapt this to this old platforming framework. It's a bit wonky because some parts aren't the same, but it's working. It's working in such a way that you can, as you can see here, can attach yourself to like a horizontal moving platform, and it just pushes you along. And you can jump and like interact with all these platforms. And the player movement is completely unaffected by the way the moving platforms are working in that regard. The only thing I had to adjust was the ledge grab, and that had to do because I didn't use basically the game's in quote-unquote physics system to like make the player jump on the like jump, like grab to the ledge and then jump on top of the platform. I more or less teleported them to like a coordinate that was above the platform. However, when you have a vertically moving platform, that coordinate shifts, and that never gets updated with the player. So you, like, in the way it's set up here, with the previous ledge grab, you would end up getting stuck in a moving platform. And obviously you don't want that. So I change it basically now. It's like it works in such a way that the player, when you do a ledge grab, they get boosted upwards. Basically, they do another jump. And that's completely fine because that's all within the physics system of everything else. And that's kind of cool because in general, this opens up more possibilities for me to do things. There was always a problem with me when I like tried to create levels and came up with like nice ideas and nice like stage like elements that I could use, where I then realized, oh, wait a second, that's a moving platform that might cause problems, so better not do that. And having this system now just makes this stuff work, or at least makes it much more of a possibility because I have the framework that does all of this. And that's cool. Again, I have no idea if I actually add these to Virtuous Heaven, because again, I don't know where and in which way, but they do exist. They make some things in Virtuous Heaven a bit more simple, which is nice. And again, gives me more space to work with other elements as well. So that's all cool. And in general, that was like a very, very nice and positive thing to have figured out. And like, just like, again, seeing that, and also in general realizing that there's like kind of, and that's the interesting part overall, in seeing someone who has been making games for a very long time and has been involved in this kind of stuff, basically having an approach that they used like over a decade ago, or like around a decade ago, or whatever, and evolving that themselves, and seeing how basically the way it's set up is still the same. However, it's much more elaborate and all that kind of stuff. So that's great. So I did all of that. I did this kind of stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about the demo and how all of that was, because I think that's kind of important also, because that was something that was like very much on my mind a lot. And also like in parts I'm not really proud of, like in parts how I reacted to some stuff that just happened with the demo. Because again, it's like always this problem when you're like very frustrated that things aren't working, and then you see some reactions that just make you angry because people are just rude. Like, doesn't excuse people being rude. It's more like me. I kind of like having had the desire to had like a bit less of being less annoyed by this kind of stuff, I guess. But anyway, so that was like, overall, I wasn't very happy about that. In general, like there were some things that I was thinking about. So for me personally, I think the largest problem with like the demo being not in a good state at the beginning of the Steam Next Fest, and honestly still having issues like until until I removed it last week, was, and I mostly removed it because I thought, okay, I got everything I wanted out of it. It's not because I thought, oh god, it's so bad, I don't want anyone to see it. It's fine. And all of that, it's mostly like it's okay. I don't need to see more like feedback right now. I got what I needed from it. Mostly what I identified here is that I was way too concerned about the demo not being large enough, and not that much concerned about the stuff that I have, especially at the beginning, being engaging and interesting enough for people to stay with it. Which led to me overemphasizing stuff that most people never saw, and also not being able to basically identify and fix issues that might prevent people from playing it. It's also like this thing where, considering how many problems this game had, believe me, there were so many more issues like a week before that, or like a few days before the Steam Next Fest started. Like, I spent at least 2 weeks before the Steam Next Fest started just fixing bugs and polishing things. And then seeing how much stuff I missed is kind of an indicator for me that what I had there was too large, because the larger it is, you have to imagine that, the larger it is, the more difficult it is to first find the things that are broken, then replicate them, and then test them properly. Because just as an example, like if you compare it with GB Robo, so playing through like what I have with Witcher 7 right now, when I play through it, other people took much longer, but when I played through it, it took me around, what did I say, like 1 hour to 90 minutes? And that's what's there now. GB Robo, my previous game, when I played through it, took me like from start to beginning, like 40 minutes, and that was the whole game. So with GB Robo, the space of stuff that I had to test, like for example, there was like a save game bug or whatever, and I had to like play through the whole game to see, okay, is this still an issue, or isn't it an issue? It was much more feasible for me to do that and have the endurance for me to do that, I don't know, several times on a day, versus with Witcher 7, where like right now it takes me an hour to get through the whole thing. Like, it takes me almost twice as long as it would take me to play through like the entirety of GB Robo. So there's much more space for me to miss things, and also much more like potential for me to just get exhausted with like playing through the game over and over again, and also not having the eyes and the perspective you need to actually find and fix bugs. You cannot just play through the game and say, oh yeah, it's fine, it's good, because then you miss everything. You have to like have like a very specific attitude when you approach this. You have to like, you have to want to break your game, and then you have to have the endurance, because you're the same. I'm my QA person, I will also I'm the person who fixes the bugs and then has to test them again. So I have to first find these things, then have to like fix them, have to deal with all of that frustration, then have to go back and see if it's actually working as intended, and then also kind of something, and that's probably the largest issue for me, be mindful of other places where the fix I introduced earlier might have broken other things as well. So there's like a much more higher potential for like cascading problems, and that's something that happened a lot with the demo. Like, there were fixes or things that I fixed in the first few days of like the Steam Next Fest that turned out broke other things further down the line that I never tested because I at that point was way too exhausted and frustrated to actually do these things. During the Steam Next Fest, I basically was in in a state where like I saw something was broken. I was incredibly frustrated that things were still not working. Was just like angry that, oh my god, all this potential attention and all that stuff just goes away because the thing you put out isn't working and everyone is angry with you. That I just couldn't take the time to then check, okay, I fixed this thing. How does this affect like basically other things further down the line? So there were like things that I thought were fixed that weren't fixed and remained broken. There were things that I never tested and just assumed would be working. For example, the thing that apparently bosses were respawning when you like never restarted the room and died in between spaces, which was not intentional. Not at all. But it just happened because apparently I never checked this. Bosses don't respawn when you leave the rooms or like restart the game because there's a flag that checks, okay, did you beat this boss? However, the problem here is that this flag only gets checked on the start of like a level, which only happens when you restart the game or like change stages in between. If you stay within this one level and die and respawn, the level never gets restarted, so the flag never gets checked. And if you enter the boss room again, the boss appears again because it never deactivated basically the thing that spawns the boss. So that was a problem that I had no idea existed until very late. And then someone was like very, very, very loud about it, which again can talk about the tone, but like in that regard, I was glad that I finally found that thing. But the problem here is, again, also like this thing of, and this disparity between like people assuming I'm just rude to them in that regard and just like basically like, and this is like kind of like an overall problem of like game design, because sometimes when you play a game, you can't know, okay, is this a problem or is this something that the developer actually intended? So I get that part, and I kind of understand this more. However, it's like, it's always this problem when you have like an ideas and you throw them out there and they collide with reality, and sometimes this collision isn't very pleasant. And that was that. And in general, like, so for me, this is, there were like several problems. I never really thought about the tutorial not being good. And I improved some parts of it, but again, I have to like keep working on that part, definitely. And this is something where like if I'm trying to find another opportunity to like show the demo in some way or show the game in some way in like a semi-public setting or whatever, and if I get that opportunity, I will definitely going to focus on just making the starting area work and like making the part that introduces the game to players and teaches them how to play, getting that part to work, and don't worry too much about all the other stuff. Not as much because I think it might be good advertisement or whatever, because I think that's I cannot test this stuff for myself because I built the controls. I know how the game is supposed to be played, and I know all the intricacies of all of this because, well, I make this stuff. It's in my hand all the time. However, and that means I don't have a perspective on that. That means I need other people to tell me and like show me if like my way of like introducing this stuff to them is actually working. And for that I need other people. I can't do that part. I can try and like think about ways, okay, how would I teach that stuff and maybe fail at it? And again, in order to like get this to a state where like people don't immediately bounce off of it and think it's a piece of shit, this takes work and this takes time, and this gets me to the next part. And I don't think that Steam is an ideal place for that kind of testing. I figured that out. I found that out during the Steam Next Fest, where like it's just like very, very evident that in general, like the Steam Next Fest is not built as like a way for people to put out demos that are more meant as like public play testing demos. So like it's mostly geared towards you advertising an upcoming game that is mostly finished, or like has like basically a framework that very hardly suggests that it's finished. Witcher's Heaven was not in such a state. So that was like a big problem. And again, this was like caused like a collision between audience expectations and my expectations. And also I might have not done a very good job at like fronting this kind of stuff and making clear that if you go into this, be aware this is not done. Things will break. Things might not be pleasant. However, if you feel like they're unpleasant, tell me, probably and hopefully in a reasonably polite manner. And that caused issues in that regard. And this also like creates something where the amount of constructive stuff that you get is not that high. However, the amount of like, or you more or less have to dig a bit more to find the constructive stuff, because you get a lot of like just like angry customer stuff as well. Which again, it's fine to be frustrated with something. That's okay, but if you go into this, and this was like my goal, is go into this trying to figure out, okay, how are these things working? Is like the game overall, is what I want to do with this game, is that part working? And if it's not working, where do I need to make adjustments? It's much harder to get to like to get this kind of information out of the feedback you're getting when like a lot of it is just like people demanding to fix minute problems, which again is fine. However, it's also like, again, where do you like? I think like personally, like in retrospect, I think I made a big mistake in basically rotating myself into oblivion in trying to fix everything, single tiny thing that people pointed out to me, because I was so afraid of being perceived as someone who does not care. Which, yeah, sure, but also again, it's like this weird conflict in that you're in, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's not me putting the blame on like the people who played the demo and didn't have a good time with it. That's fine. It's more like, again, how do these things work? How, like, what kind of expectations do you have in the demo that you're playing? What kind of expectations does the developer have? And that was like, it's just not the correct place. And I don't think that Steam in general is a good place for that kind of like feedback gathering, because like there is like a thing that Steam also lets you do, which is just like create a playtest build where you can send this out to people and people can just basically sign up and do playtesting for you. My experience with GB Roba was, maybe this changes, but with GB Roba was that basically a ton of people kind of like looked at the game and it got put up in like a handful of lists or whatever, and maybe a few people also played the playtest, but I barely got any feedback from anyone. So that's also not very helpful, because I largely think that like people on Steam, and again, that's has to do with the way the platform works and so on, and anything else. Sorry for the random German word here. It's like it has nothing to do with the people themselves, but more like how the platform is set up, how like the platform itself creates expectations on like the things that people are playing, how developers are using these features themselves. Again, if you're mostly using that to advertise mostly finished games, even if you say it's a playtest build, most people will, who are using these things, will go into other playtest builds expecting similar things, even though it might not be the same. So there's like something where I have to figure out a different way to find people who are willing and patient enough to walk through this without like taking too much of their time, and for me to make sure that I get the information that I need to make the game in such a way that it's that it at least isn't immediately hostile to people. I'm going to be very honest here in saying that it most likely will still be fairly hostile to people, because it is at the beginning, it's very overwhelming. There is not much of an on-ramp in terms of like, okay, I'm slowly introducing movement mechanics, I'm slowly introducing more complex elements and all that kind of stuff. It's mostly, okay, here's a wall, start to climb it. However, the thing with this game is there is no, like, the wall most likely won't get much steeper than it is at the beginning. So the moment, like, all of these separate elements start to click, hopefully the perceived difficulty and hostility of the game will vanish. The problem here is to kind of find a way to at least give people some footholds. And I have ideas for that. None of them are there, but it's like kind of like where I am right now with that. But overall, it was incredibly frustrating. It was frustrating, like, again, because you want to get some information out of it. It was hard to get that information. There was a lot of it. Like, a bunch of people gave feedback, and what makes me personally happy about that is for like most people who managed to stick with the game, the feedback I got that they had mostly had a good time with it. Obviously not with everything, but like overall, and especially for the things I was mostly concerned about, the feedback in these elements was like mostly positive. The moment people got used to the movement system, the feedback was mostly positive. Most people who gave me feedback about the writing said that they liked it. I didn't get a lot of stuff back and said it's like pretentious garbage or whatever, which also would be fine. Because I'm not used to this kind of work, but it's in that regard there was like also a lot of positive stuff here. However, it was a lot of personal frustration in there, and yeah, I generally underestimated the amount of work basically this game would create. It made me painfully realize that what I scoped out right now is way too large for me. Because if you imagine that, like, I already had trouble like fixing and finding all the bugs in what right now is about a third of what I had thought this game would be in terms of size, a third, maybe a quarter, and then imagine like the full thing, the entire game with all the different elements, with like so many little things that could break. I don't have the resources to fix all of this and to basically not only to build this, but like to on my own make sure that it all works and has a degree of polish that I'm happy with and all that kind of stuff. So I have to make some adjustments here, because otherwise this game will never get done. Or if it gets done, it will need another year or so for me to just fix everything that's broken. While in the meantime, most people won't be having a good time with it, because it will be a buggy mess, and nobody wants that. And like the last part here is like I once again feel like it's for me personally like once again a reminder that I probably announced this game way too early. Honestly, it's probably still too early for me. Like, if I think about it, it's probably still not in a state where like reasonably I would say, okay, let's announce it, because so much is still very vague. For me personally, I know the overall direction, and that was kind of clear last year as well when I announced it, but like there's still like it's still so not done, or not in a state where I feel personally comfortable, where I say, okay, now we can announce it and like clearly communicate about what it is, because so much here is still not there. And like a lot of it, and with the demo as well, it felt basically like you build the basic structure, the foundation of a house, and then you put up like a cardboard stand-in that looks like the house is done and finished, and then you just hope that no one goes around it and see that actually it's just like a cube of concrete with bare walls and nothing in it. And that's kind of how it felt. So that's just something I have to deal with, because the game's announced, and yeah, it exists, and people pay attention, like some people pay attention to it and all that kind of stuff. But it's, for me personally, it's like in a way where I think it's not really in a way personally would have liked it to go. But it is what it is, and now I have to make adjustments to all of that. And that's like the last thing that I've been thinking about this like the last few weeks. And this is just something I want to mention in this regard. So basically, this is like the reality of making games on Steam as a low-budget solo developer. If you're wondering, this is like a GIF I took from... this is like, I need stuff to have run in the background when I do other things. And something I recently done, and it's like a weird thing because personally I don't really like cars and I'm not much of a fan of motorsports in general, but one thing that is kind of nice to have running in the background is endurance racing. So this is like a replay or like a short clip from the last year's 24 hours race on the Nürburgring, which is an interesting race because it's a race where basically, and you see this here, this is like, I think in the second lap of the race, second or third lap, beginning of the third lap of the race. And what you see here is like a bunch of professional race car drivers in GT3 cars, which I think have around 600 horsepower or something like that. It's like ridiculous, and they all kind of look like tanks, and it's weird. Lapping like some amateur race drivers in a Dacia Logan that they tuned up. And this is a race where both of these kinds of cars run because the racetrack is so long that it kind of works still. But if you are a low budget, or like what I at this point call an amateur game developer, and I don't mean this in the sense of like that you're bad at what you're doing. I mean this much more in the sense of like not having the resources that a professional game developer has in terms of like money, mostly money, and like resources to like have more people work on your game and to spend more time on several elements and all that kind of stuff. If you don't have these things, this is your reality. You're driving your like in overall probably in comparison to like normal road cars, still like kind of fast car around. And then but you're in the same, technically you're in the same competition as much larger studios with much more money. And you're in the same thing. And people on Steam go into all of this, and because it's presented on the same platform, sometimes right next to each other in some way, especially during something like the Steam Next Fest, this creates this expectation in general, like from a customer side, that you're getting this professional experience and this professional degree of polish and all that kind of stuff with every game you're seeing here. But obviously that's not the case because not everyone has the same amount of resources, but the expectations are the same. And that's a problem that like you as like a smaller developer has to deal with in some way or another, because you cannot compete, like, in general, like, I cannot compete with studios that, like, even employ, like, 5 people or whatever, or, like, that actually have a budget, come to think of it, because I don't have that. I have myself and whatever money I can sometimes scrap together to pay someone else to do things that I'm, like, definitely not comfortable with doing myself, and any other kind of work I have to do on my own. However, in the end, on Steam, I presented right next to like whatever else like exists there, like in the same genre and has probably much more budget. I mean, just look at the related games on Witcher 7's Steam page. It's like, yeah, sure, they are like on paper are related to one another, but definitely not in scope and budget and all that kind of stuff. And the problem here is then, like, for me as as an amateur developer in that sense, is to understand that even though I might partake in the same car race, like normally in the same car race as larger studios or like professional cars, as like in this animation here, I am not really competing with them because I will lose that. They, like, from the start have much more resources than I have, and I cannot fulfill these expectations. and I should not expect from myself to fulfill these expectations, because I will just make myself miserable. And this is also, I think, a little bit what happened with the demo. I had like expected and like put way too much like pressure on me, like to create something that frankly I'm not able to create. So let's not do that, because that's just like, again, you're like setting yourself up not really for failure in any way, but just to not feel good about what you're doing, because you constantly compare yourself to things that you cannot compete with, and that just makes everything not very good. And yeah, so let's not do that. I really hope that YouTube doesn't like ding me for like copyright thing for like this short GIF, but who knows? We'll see when I upload this video. So I'm going to try to not do this. What I'll try, and let's talk a little bit about next month, or like this month, I guess. What I'm going to try, and like I did a little bit of work already on that, is I'm going to make the overall game, I'm going to make it smaller. Because again, already like what I heard is that like people play through it, like sometimes it took them, those that got through it took, I don't know, along 2 to 3 hours. One per person took more than 10, which is admirable, but also I'm very sorry for that. That's not intentional. So I need to I want to make it smaller. I want to make it more compact, both to make the game overall take less time and also to make it easy on myself. But what I won't do is go back and start with the first area again and make that one smaller and so on. What I'll do instead is I'm going to start working on area 3 now. I'm going to make that one in the size that I want all of the other areas to be. See how it feels, and then make area 4. Then go back, remake the first 2 areas, and so on. So that's kind of the overall idea. What I also want to do this month is create basically a pitch deck for Virtua 7. I wanted to do that in February. I just couldn't do it. And start to try and pitch it to publishers. It's so hard for me to be optimistic about this kind of stuff. It's the same with me and trying to find jobs in game development. It's the discrepancy between what I think I can do and then realizing that maybe it's not what I think I can do, and still being optimistic about that kind of stuff. But I want to try to do this because this is also about me understanding that in order to make this game, in order to get this game into a state that I would like it to be in once it's done, I need help. And in order to get help, I need money to pay people for it. Because I cannot expect other people to do the kind of work that would be required for free. So this is why I ideally need a publisher in that regard, especially in terms of in regards to playtesting and that kind of stuff. Playtesting and marketing. But to be very honest, I'm mostly concerned about getting the information that I need in order to make this game work for people. To a degree that I personally want it to work for people. Again, there's there will be a discrepancy between expectations here, and I'm fine with that. But again, it's the difference between, okay, I'm going to punch you in the face with an anvil, and it's maybe it's a slight push at the beginning. And I'd much rather have the game start with a slight push against the player and not with the anvil punch. Right now it's the anvil punch, and then the anvil breaks, and then everything breaks, and you're floating around in nothingness, and an error message appears. Or that's how it was when the demo started. But anyway, that's the plan of it. I'm going to try and figure out a way if any publisher plans don't work out, which again is to be expected, but still worth a try. I'm going to try and figure out a way to do more structured playtesting in a different way. And what I want to do in that regard is focus much more and making sure that I get good, detailed information and not as much about, okay, I need a lot of it. Because I cannot, this is like more like thinking, okay, if I cannot get a lot of like feedback, I have to make sure that it's like, that it's fairly detailed, to make sure that I find the information that I need. And then I just hope that the feedback, that the little amount of feedback that I have is reflecting reality enough to work. But again, we'll have to see about that. It's a lot. I've been thinking a ton about like everything really over the last few weeks, partially because of the break that I took and the exhaustion, but also because in March marks the 10th anniversary of the first game I ever published in any shape or form. You can find it on my itch.io page. I think it's called 3 washers and 3 switches and a washer in space at this point. It never had a real name back then, but it's kind of like a thing where you then realize, oh my god, I've been doing this in a way for 10 years, even though I really started only like really pushing this like since 2015, which also isn't that long, isn't that much like shorter. It's just like this realizing, oh my god, I've been doing this for this long, and what am I doing? Where am I going with this? What's the direction here? And there was like a lot of thinking that happened, and so that was like also like just stuff that sticks in my head and that I still need to kind of work through, because it's a ton, and there's a lot of frustration on my end and a lot of like generally considering my options like in everything. But that doesn't mean that I'll stop making games, because there's a reason that despite it being very unpleasant and very exhausting, I still do it. And it's because I want to. And I want to get these ideas out. So I'll keep doing this. But again, it's the usual thing, right? You realize how much time you spend on something, and then you reminisce about the times that have passed. But anyway, that's all of this for this month. You can follow @Mokograd on Twitter for like updates over the game, about the game, and like any other things that might be relevant in that regard. You might still subscribe to my email newsletter that I might still launch at some point. It's kind of like a recurring thing that I still want to launch this thing, so you can subscribe to it. At some point you will get information. I promise. I don't know when, but it will happen. And obviously subscribe to like this YouTube channel if you're watching it on YouTube. Wishlist Virtua 7 on Steam. It will take a while until the game's out, so better wishlist it so that you like know once it's coming out. You can also follow the game on the Steam page, which might also be like a much better reassurance that you like get information once like something happens with the game. Again, especially considering that it will take a while. Still, even with my attempt to reduce scope, it will probably take until mid of next year, give or take. Who knows? But that's what I think will happen. Anyway, hope you have a good month. Hope that spring's coming soon, because I'm sick of winter. And yeah, see you around. Bye.